Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to tell you about a story that I was told by a client who asked me to come out to his site in the Philippines. Just before we left the Philippines in 2019, at the end of season 2, I was invited out to meet with this gentleman who I'm going to call Dr. Admiral. The Dr. Admiral told me this fantastic story about a site that he's been sitting on since World War II. And at the time, he was a doctor to an admiral in the Japanese Imperial Army. And he was only 16 or 17, 18 years old at the time. So he goes on to tell me that on this particular piece of property, which sits upon a high bluff over the ocean, rocky cliffs down below, water crashing up against the cliffside. He said during the war, or actually before the war even began, in the late 1930s, the admiral, who was part of the Japanese Imperial Army, was in charge of a brigade of ships that were loaded with treasure from all over the globe. Supposedly, this treasure consisted of not only gold bars, but silver bars, platinum bars. According to him, the crown jewels from 3 countries are also located in this location. And as a caveat, he also said that there was a special item inside of this vault system that was part of Hitler's, or the Germans had a piece of alien technology that they were using to back engineer. And when the war broke out, they squirreled it away into a bank vault system. And of course, the Japanese took those vaults as well in areas where they thought it was going to be safe. So this also piece of treasure ended up inside of this vault bunker. But this bunker is very unique. It's not unlike any other bunker I've ever heard about. So the Admiral Doctor went on to tell me that prior to the war, and in the late 30s, Japanese engineers came into this location on the seaside, and along the seaside where this water crashed up against the shoreline, it had hollowed out like a sea cave, at the tide line. And the sea cave went back pretty far. So the Japanese engineers decided that they were going to use the sea cave as a dry dock bunker. And what they ended up doing was sealing off the entranceway to the ocean, then digging out and excavating over a course of 4.5 to 5 years that it took them to do this, a tunnel that was over 1 kilometer long, 60 feet wide, and 300 feet deep. And along the inside of this tunnel, or this trench that they dug inside the mountain, they hollowed out like little niches along the side walls as they went down in elevation. So every time they dropped like 2 or 3, 30 or 40 feet, they'd hollow out these little cutaways in the wall. And they were essentially dry docks for ships. So once this whole thing was completed, they took an armada of ships, and according to the Admiral Doctor, there's 25 full ships in this location. So once everything was hollowed out on the inside, they blew the opening open where they had concreted it to the ocean, let it fill with seawater, and started floating their ships in there. And once they floated all the ships in a line in this 1 kilometer long tunnel, they sealed the opening back up. And as they sealed the opening back up, they started pumping the water out. And as the water level started to drop down, they would slide the ships, and there's little pockets they created along the sidewall. They'd slide them into these dry dock bunkers and continue to pump the water out until they were high and dry, basically sitting in a little rock niche hole on the side of the main tunnel. And as they drained out some more water, another 75 feet below the first set, they hollowed out some more niches, and they slid more ships in there until the whole thing drained out, and the bottom held like 6 ships in a row that stayed on the bottom, and all the other ships were locked up in these little niches along the sidewalls. So, and that is incredible in itself. He went on to say that they had hollowed out a bunch of different rooms to store treasure in. And over the years, when the war ended and it was sealed off from the outside, there was a 300-foot shaft from the top side that they would use to access this. It was one of the vent holes for the location. He went on to tell me that while the admiral, who he used to take care of, was alive, that every year or two after the war, they would go down the shaft and go to a room in there that had about 5,000 metric tons in a giant pile in the middle of the room. And, the admiral would take a couple peons or slaves or, local people down, and they would go and retrieve a couple bars, bring that back to the surface, and live off the monies that generated from those bars. Well, a bunch of years went by and they were doing that, and everybody's living happy, and they were just waiting for the day that they would eventually open this place back up. But lo and behold, I guess, sometime along the way in the past 10 years, the admiral passed away. And he gave explicit instructions to the doctor about going in and retrieving anything off of this pile. He said it was booby-trapped, and he had to be very careful about what he was doing in there. So, of course, the day comes that the doctor, they're starting to run low on cash and need to go down and retrieve a couple more bars from the pile. So the doctor takes a couple Filipinos down the shaft, and they proceed to go to this room where the gold bars are stored. And they get to the entrance of the room, and for some reason, doctor is prepared, and he has gas mask with him. So the two Filipinos walk into this room towards the pile, and there's this giant pile of gold sitting on the floor. And the two Filipinos walk over to the pile, and then as soon as they slide two 6.2 kilo bars off of the pile, a whirlwind of wind comes into this tunnel from the back side. Now, the doctor's standing in the opening that leads into this room, and the two Filipinos are standing next to the pile with a gold bar in each hand, or one gold bar in both of their hands as they're holding one apiece. And this wind kicks up out of nowhere, and the doctor shines his light. He sees like dust and stuff flying, and he literally says it's like in a whirlwind pattern, like dust and debris is spinning around in this wind. And of course the Filipinos get scared, and the doctor gets scared, and they take the two bars and they make haste for the shaft, and they start climbing back out. I guess accordingly that the two Filipinos didn't have gas masks, and the doctor was armed with a gas mask, so he put it on, and as they trudged back up 300 feet up the shaft, they barely make it out to the surface. Well, doctor makes it out to the surface, and the two Filipinos succumb to whatever poison was in the air that was caused by this whirlwind, and they die inside the tunnel. So a couple days later, doctor goes back to retrieve both of their bodies and the gold, and he takes care of the gold. It turns it into paper, turns it into cash, and gives the guys proper burial and takes care of their family. And he seals up the opening so that this can't happen to anybody else. So years go by, and now they're looking for a team or a group of people that they can work with to expose this site. And here he comes, talking to me. He wants me to head up a team to take that gold out of there. So the Dr. Admiral, he tells me this story, and I am just like blown away. So I, go back and say, reiterate a little bit, like, hey, okay, so you're telling me you go down the shaft for 300 feet, and what happens then? He said, you end up in a chamber, and in that chamber, it's a square cut room, and off of that square cut room is another square cut room where these gold bars are sitting. He said, if you walk to the edge of the chamber, one wall of it opens wide open into this underground dry dock. He said, if you shine the flashlight off, you actually shine it down into this 300-foot deep trench, and you can actually see the ships down at the bottom. And as you shine your light out and across into the space, you can see the niches and these ships that are in their little pockets on the wall. You need ropes and all kinds of gear to get down to that because the water level's way down and the ships are sitting pretty much on the bedrock down there with just a little bit of water around their hulls, and everything else is dry and musty and damp. But they would only go to the pile itself to retrieve the gold bars. That's all they really needed to do, and everything else stays the same. So it's pretty incredible to think that a place, not only has this much wealth, treasure, ships, 25 ships in a bunker in a dry dock that, God, can you imagine if you flooded that place and all these ships come blasting out of the side of a hillside, kind of looking like the Goonies would be, just be incredible. The crown jewels of 3 countries, God only knows what other riches are in there. It's supposed to be a full aircraft on one of these ships that was taken apart, and there's gold in its fuselage. The wings are stored above it so that I guess someday when you take the ship outside, you can reassemble the plane and fly it out of there. I mean, all of this sounded so incredible that I just look forward to the day that I can go back and actually make the contract with the Admiral Doctor and start working on this site. I mean, the gold alone is fantastic, but certainly 25 ships in the dry dock, it's got to be a sight to see, buried inside of a mountain. So this site is definitely high on the pile of gotta do in my lifetime. Gotta be able to see it. Imagine being able to see that material firsthand, and or these ships, and or just the engineering feat alone that it took to put all these ships inside the mountain and seal it up. So definitely looking out for going out to that site and getting back there. Bring you guys along for the ride. I think it'll be some awesome adventure, not only for the gold but for the historic value of seeing how it was done, seeing these ships in place, and the crown jewels of 3 countries. It's going to be pretty special, not only for that value, but the 25 ships alone, just for what they were, if they had nothing on them, would be amazing. So stay tuned. We're going to get back to that site in short order.